Billionaire returned home from a business trip and found his ex sleeping with a baby in his bed. Before we begin, drop a comment telling us which city you're watching from, and once the story ends, don't forget to rate it from 0 to 10. Oh, and make sure to follow our channel for more stories like this. Now, sit back and enjoy every detail. The late afternoon sun filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Manhattan penthouse, casting long shadows across the marble floors. Sloane Bennett shifted carefully on the king-sized bed, her body still tender from childbirth just 4 weeks ago. In her arms, baby Willa slept peacefully, her tiny chest rising and falling in perfect rhythm. The infant's delicate features were already showing hints of her father's strong jawline, though Sloane tried not to think about that. At 29, Sloane had always been the type of woman who planned everything meticulously. Her honey blonde hair, usually styled in perfect waves, now hung loosely around her shoulders in a messy bun. Dark circles shadowed her green eyes, evidence of countless sleepless nights. She wore an oversized sweater that had once belonged to Vincent, its cashmere fabric soft against her sensitive skin. The apartment around her screamed wealth and sophistication, chrome fixtures, designer furniture, art pieces that cost more than most people's cars. But to Sloane, it felt like a beautiful prison. She had been living here for 3 months since the divorce, knowing Vincent was traveling for business. The plan had been simple: have the baby, recover, and find a new place before he returned. But recovery had taken longer than expected, and finding an apartment in New York while caring for a newborn proved nearly impossible. Willa stirred in her arms, making those soft baby sounds that melted Sloane's heart every time. She looked down at her daughter, their daughter, and whispered, "I know, sweetheart. We'll figure this out. Mommy just needs a few more days." The sound of a key turning in the front door froze her blood. Vincent wasn't supposed to be back for another week. Sloane's heart hammered against her ribs as she heard his footsteps in the marble foyer, the familiar sound of his Italian leather shoes against the floor. She considered hiding, but where could she go? This was his penthouse, his domain, and she was an intruder now. "Sloane?" His deep voice carried through the apartment, confusion evident in his tone. She closed her eyes, holding Willa closer. There was no escape now. Vincent Devereaux appeared in the bedroom doorway, his tall frame filling the space. At 36, he was devastating in the way that only certain men could be. 6'3" with broad shoulders that filled out his charcoal suit perfectly. His dark hair was slightly mussed from travel, and his steel-gray eyes held an intensity that had always made her feel exposed. But now those eyes widened in shock as they took in the scene before him. His ex-wife, in his bed, holding a baby. For a moment, time suspended itself. Vincent's briefcase slipped from his hand, hitting the floor with a loud thud that made Willa startle awake. The baby's cry pierced the silence, and Sloane instinctively began rocking her, making soft shushing sounds. "What?" Vincent's voice came out rough, barely above a whisper. His eyes moved from Sloane to the baby and back again, his sharp mind clearly trying to process what he was seeing. "Whose child is that?" Sloane met his gaze steadily, even as her heart threatened to burst from her chest. "Mine." "Yours?" The word came out strangled. Vincent stepped closer, his eyes now fixed on the baby's face. Even from across the room, the resemblance was unmistakable. Willa had inherited his dark hair and the shape of his eyes, though hers were still the newborn blue that might change with time. "How old?" His voice was barely audible now. 4 weeks. Vincent's face went pale as he did the math in his head. His hands clenched into fists at his sides, and Sloane could see the moment realization hit him like a physical blow. "She's mine." It wasn't a question. Sloane simply nodded, unable to trust her voice. Vincent staggered backward until his back hit the wall. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she remembered from their marriage whenever he was overwhelmed. "Why didn't you tell me?" The question hung in the air between them, loaded with months of pain and silence. Sloane looked down at Willa, who had stopped crying and was now looking around with those unfocused, newborn eyes. "Because you were busy planning your new life," she said quietly. "The life where you didn't want to be tied down anymore, remember?" Vincent flinched as if she'd slapped him. "That's not... I didn't know you were pregnant." "Would it have mattered?" Sloane's voice was steady, but Vincent could see the hurt in her eyes. "You made it very clear that marriage was a mistake, that you felt trapped. I wasn't going to trap you further with a baby you didn't want." "You don't know what I wanted," Vincent said, his voice gaining strength. "You never gave me the chance to..." "To what? Change your mind out of obligation?" Sloane shifted Willa to her shoulder, patting the baby's back gently. I've seen how you handle things you consider complications, Vincent. You eliminate them. The words hit their mark. Vincent's jaw tightened, and Sloane could see the war playing out across his features. The man who built a billion-dollar empire by controlling every variable, faced with the one thing he couldn't control or plan for. He stared at his daughter, and something shifted in his expression. The hard edges softened just slightly as Willa made a small sound and turned her head toward his voice. "What's her name?" he asked softly. "Willa." Vincent nodded slowly, as if testing the name in his mind. "Willa Devereaux?" "Willa Bennett," Sloane corrected firmly. "I kept my maiden name for her." Another blow. Vincent's hands unclenched, and for a moment he looked lost. This man who always had an answer for everything, who commanded boardrooms and made million-dollar decisions without blinking. "You were supposed to be gone before I got back," he said finally. "I know, I'm sorry, I needed more time. Where will you go?" Sloane looked around the room that had been her sanctuary for the past months. "I'll figure something out." Vincent was quiet for a long moment, studying her face. She looked tired, fragile in a way he'd never seen before, but there was also a new strength in her, a fierce protectiveness that radiated from her as she held their child. "You can stay," he said suddenly, "until you find something suitable." Sloane's eyes snapped to his, surprise clear in her expression. "Vincent, I don't think this is a big apartment. We can coexist temporarily." He straightened his tie, slipping back into business mode. "For the baby's sake." Sloane studied his face, looking for the catch. There was always a catch with Vincent. "What do you want in return?" "Nothing," he said, though the word came out too quickly. I need time to process this." Willa chose that moment to let out a small cry, and Sloane automatically began bouncing her gently. Vincent watched the motion with an intensity that made Sloane's skin prickle with awareness. Even after everything, even with the divorce papers signed and their marriage officially over, being in the same room with him still affected her. "I should feed her," Sloane said, more to break the tension than because Willa was actually hungry. Vincent nodded and stepped aside, giving her clear passage to the door, but as she moved past him, he caught her arm gently. "Sloane," his voice was rough with emotion, "we need to talk, really talk." She looked down at his hand on her arm, then up at his face. "I know." He released her and watched as she walked out of the bedroom, carrying their daughter. When they were gone, Vincent sank down on the edge of the bed, his head in his hands. What had he done? What would you do if you discovered you were a parent 4 weeks after the fact? Vincent stood under the scalding spray of his shower, letting the water pound against his shoulders as he tried to make sense of the last hour. A daughter. He had a daughter. The words felt foreign in his mind, like a language he'd never learned to speak. When he finally emerged from the bathroom, wrapped in his navy silk robe, the apartment felt different. There were sounds he'd never heard before, soft humming coming from the guest room, the gentle creak of a rocking chair, and underneath it all, the occasional soft coo of a baby. His baby. Vincent dressed mechanically in his usual morning uniform, pressed white shirt, navy slacks, silver cufflinks that had been his father's. But as he knotted his tie, his hands trembled slightly. Control had always been his anchor, the thing that separated him from the chaos of emotion. Now that anchor was dragging him into uncharted waters. The kitchen smelled of coffee and something else, something warm and domestic that he couldn't identify. Sloane stood at the counter, still in that oversized sweater, bouncing Willa gently while holding a steaming mug. The baby was awake, making those soft gurgling sounds that newborns make. "I made coffee," Sloane said without looking at him. "Your usual blend is still in the cabinet." Vincent poured himself a cup, noting how Sloane's was only half finished and had gone cold. "Did you sleep at all?" She was up every 2 hours. Sloane's voice held no complaint, just exhaustion. Babies don't really have schedules yet. Vincent studied his daughter over the rim of his coffee cup. In the morning light streaming through the windows, he could see more of himself in her features. The way her tiny hands moved, the set of her mouth even in sleep. It was unsettling and wonderful and terrifying all at once. "What does she need?" he asked suddenly. Sloane looked surprised by the question. "What do you mean?" "I mean practically. Diapers, formula, clothes. What does she need that she doesn't have?" "Vincent, you don't have to. She's my responsibility too." The words came out sharper than he intended. "Whether I knew about her or not, she's here now. She's mine." Something flickered across Sloane's face. Surprise, maybe even a hint of relief. She needs her own room eventually. Right now, she's sleeping in a bassinet in the guest room with me. And I've been doing cloth diapers because disposables are expensive when you're buying them alone, but make a list, Vincent interrupted, pulling out his phone. Everything. I'll have it delivered today. It's not that simple. Babies aren't a problem you can throw money at and solve. Vincent's jaw tightened. I'm aware of that. But providing for her basic needs is something I can do. Willa chose that moment to start fussing, her small face scrunching up in preparation for a full cry. Sloane immediately shifted into motion, swaying and making soft, shushing sounds. But the baby's cries only grew louder. She's hungry, Sloane said, moving toward the guest room. I need to… Here. The word came out before Vincent could stop himself. Stay here, you haven't finished your coffee. Sloane paused, looking at him with confusion. Vincent, she needs to eat. I'm nursing her. Heat flooded Vincent's face as the reality of new parenthood hit him. Of course. He knew nothing about babies, nothing about what they needed or how to care for them. He was a man who could negotiate million-dollar deals in 3 languages, but he was completely helpless when it came to his own child. Right. Of course. He turned away, embarrassed by his own ignorance. 20 minutes later, Sloane returned to find Vincent standing at the window, staring out at the city skyline. Willa was calm now, sleeping peacefully in her mother's arms. I called my assistant, Vincent said without turning around. Canceled all my meetings for the week. The week? Sloane couldn't hide her surprise. Vincent never canceled meetings. His schedule was sacred, planned months in advance. I need to adjust some things. He finally turned to face her, and Sloane was struck by how uncertain he looked. Vincent Devereaux, who commanded respect in every room he entered, looked lost. I don't know anything about babies. Most people don't. When they start, you seem to know what you're doing. Sloane let out a soft laugh that held no humor. I've had 4 weeks of trial by fire, and a lot of sleepless nights to figure it out. The first week, I cried as much as she did. Vincent's expression softened. You were alone. Yes. That must have been… He struggled for the word. Difficult. Terrifying, Sloane corrected, but also amazing. She's amazing, Vincent. Even when she's crying at 3 in the morning and I haven't slept in days, just looking at her makes everything worth it. Vincent watched as Sloane looked down at Willa, her whole face transforming with love. It was a side of her he'd never seen during their marriage, this fierce maternal tenderness. They'd talked about children occasionally, in abstract terms, someday conversations that never quite materialized into plans. Can I… Vincent started, then stopped, running a hand through his hair. Can I hold her? Sloane's eyes widened slightly. Are you sure? No, but I want to try. Sloane moved closer and Vincent caught her familiar scent. Vanilla and something uniquely her that had always made him want to bury his face in her neck. The memory hit him like a physical blow, reminding him of lazy Sunday mornings when the world outside their bed didn't exist. Support her head, Sloane instructed softly, carefully transferring Willa into Vincent's arms. Just like that. She's stronger than she looks, but newborns can't hold their heads up yet. Vincent held his breath as his daughter settled against his chest. She was so small, so impossibly light, but also solid and real in a way that made his chest tight. Her tiny hand curled against his shirt, and something inside him shifted permanently. Hello, little one, he whispered, his voice rough. I'm your father. Willa made a soft sound almost like she was responding to his voice. Vincent's eyes filled with tears he hadn't expected, and when he looked up, he found Sloane watching him with an expression he couldn't read. She likes you, Sloane said softly. How can you tell? She's relaxed. When she doesn't like someone, she gets fussy. Babies can sense things. They stood there in silence for several minutes, Vincent holding his daughter while Sloane watched. It felt surreal, like a scene from someone else's life. 6 months ago, they'd been planning their divorce. Now they were standing in his kitchen like a family. I should get some work done, Sloane said finally, breaking the spell. While she's calm. What kind of work? Freelance graphic design. I can do it from anywhere, which is helpful with… She gestured vaguely at the situation. Vincent carefully handed Willa back to her mother, immediately missing the weight of her in his arms. The guest room isn't set up for work. I make do. The dining table works fine. Use my office. The offer surprised them both. Vincent's home office was his sanctuary, off limits even during their marriage. It has better lighting, and a more comfortable chair. Sloane stared at him. Are you sure? Yes. I won't be using it this week anyway. Thank you. Her voice was soft, genuine. That's really thoughtful. For a moment their eyes met and held, and Vincent felt the familiar pull that had always existed between them. But then Willa made a sound, breaking the moment, and Sloane stepped back. "I should let you get back to whatever you were doing," she said, suddenly formal again. Vincent watched as she walked away carrying their daughter. When they were gone, the kitchen felt empty in a way it never had before. He looked at Sloane's abandoned coffee cup, still sitting on the counter, and found himself reluctant to clean it up. His phone buzzed with a text from his assistant. "Rescheduled all meetings as requested. Is everything all right?" Vincent stared at the message for a long moment before typing back, "Everything has changed." He spent the rest of the morning making lists. Things Willa needed, things he needed to learn, people he needed to call. But underneath the practical planning, one thought kept circling through his mind. He had walked away from the most important thing in his life, and he hadn't even known it existed. The delivery trucks had been arriving all afternoon. Vincent watched from his office window as boxes were carried up to the penthouse. A crib, a changing table, clothes in impossibly small sizes, toys that Willa wouldn't be able to use for months. When Sloane had handed him her list that morning, he'd tripled every quantity and added items she hadn't even thought to request. Now, at nearly midnight, he stood in what used to be his spare office, watching two men from an expensive baby furniture store assemble a nursery that rivaled anything in the Upper East Side's most exclusive homes. Soft lavender walls, white furniture with silver accents, a mobile with tiny stars that played gentle lullabies. "Almost finished, Mr. Devereaux," one of the men said, tightening the last screw on the crib. "The room should be ready for the little one tonight." Vincent nodded, running his hand along the crib's rail. The wood was smooth, expensive, perfect, but something felt wrong about it. Too polished, too pristine. It looked like a display in a magazine rather than a place where his daughter would sleep. After the men left, Vincent stood alone in the completed nursery. Everything was perfect, and nothing felt right. He was adjusting the height of the mobile when he heard soft footsteps behind him. "Vincent?" Sloane's voice was barely above a whisper. She appeared in the doorway wearing an old NYU t-shirt and pajama pants, her hair falling in waves around her shoulders. Willa was in her arms, wide awake and alert despite the late hour. "What is all this? I thought she should have her own room." Vincent's voice came out more defensive than he'd intended. "Children need their own space." Sloane stepped into the room, her eyes taking in every detail. The furniture alone probably cost more than most people's cars. "Vincent, it's beautiful, but you didn't need to." "Yes, I did." He turned to face her, and Sloane was surprised by the intensity in his expression. "I missed the first 4 weeks of her life. I missed everything. The birth, her first sounds, the first time she opened her eyes. I can't get that back, but I can make sure she has everything she needs from now on." Sloane watched as he struggled with emotions he clearly didn't know how to process. "She doesn't need expensive things, Vincent. She needs stability, presence, love. I don't know how to do those things." The admission came out raw, unguarded. "I know how to provide. I know how to fix problems with resources. But this," he gestured helplessly at Willa, "I don't know how to be someone's father." Willa made a soft cooing sound, and both adults looked down at her. In the gentle glow of the nursery's carefully chosen lighting, she looked like something magical, ethereal. "Would you like to try putting her down for the night?" Sloane asked quietly. "In her new crib?" Vincent's eyes widened slightly. "What if I do it wrong?" "There's no wrong way. Just be gentle." Sloane carefully transferred Willa into Vincent's arms, and again he marveled at how light she was, how fragile and perfect. He walked slowly to the crib, hyper-aware of every movement, every breath. When he lowered her onto the soft mattress, Willa's eyes fluttered closed almost immediately. "She trusts you," Sloane observed, standing beside him as they watched their daughter sleep. "How is that possible? She doesn't even know me." "Babies are wiser than we think. They sense things adults miss." Sloane's voice was soft in the dim room. "She knows you're her father." They stood in comfortable silence for several minutes, watching Willa sleep. The mobile turned slowly above her head, casting gentle shadows on the walls. It should have been peaceful, but Vincent felt a restlessness building in his chest. "Why didn't you hate me?" he asked suddenly. "When I asked for the divorce, when I said I needed to be free, why didn't you fight me?" Sloane was quiet for so long that Vincent thought she might not answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely audible. "Because I loved you too much to trap you." She kept her eyes on Willa. not looking at him. You were so miserable toward the end, staying late at the office, traveling more, pulling away from me. I thought if I let you go, maybe you'd find whatever it was you were looking for. And if I came back, I thought if you came back it would be because you wanted to, not because you felt obligated to. She finally looked at him and Vincent saw tears gathering in her eyes. But you never looked back, Vincent, not once. I couldn't. The words came out strangled. If I had looked back, I never would have been able to leave. And I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought I was setting you free too. Free to do what? I loved our life together. I loved the quiet mornings and the way you'd bring me coffee in bed. I loved how you'd get this crease between your eyebrows when you were concentrating, and how you'd unconsciously reach for me in your sleep. Her voice broke slightly. I didn't want freedom from that. Vincent turned to face her fully, and the pain in her expression nearly brought him to his knees. Then what did you want? I wanted you to want me as much as I wanted you. I wanted to feel like I was a choice you made every day, not just a habit you'd fallen into. A tear slipped down her cheek. I wanted to feel like enough. Sloan. Vincent reached out instinctively, brushing the tear away with his thumb. The contact sent electricity through both of them. You were always enough. You were everything. Then why did you leave? The question hung between them like a physical thing. Vincent's hand was still on her face, and he could feel her trembling slightly under his touch. Because I was terrified, he admitted. Because loving you that much scared me more than any business deal, any risk I'd ever taken. Because my father spent his whole life putting work before family, and I was becoming him. And I was terrified I'd destroy the best thing in my life through neglect. So you destroyed it through abandonment instead. The words hit like a physical blow, but Vincent didn't flinch away from them. Yes. Willa stirred in her crib, making a small sound that drew both their attention. Vincent dropped his hand from Sloane's face, the spell broken. I should go, Sloane said quietly. Let her settle in her new room. Will you? Vincent started, then stopped. Will you be comfortable in the guest room? I could have the master suite prepared for you instead. It's larger, more comfortable. The guest room is fine. Sloane moved toward the door, pausing in the doorway. Thank you for this. For her room. It's beautiful. Sloane. She turned back to him. I never stopped loving you. Even when I was telling myself I needed to be free, even when I was trying to convince myself I'd made the right choice. I never stopped. She stared at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Love was never our problem, Vincent. Trust was. And you can't build a life with someone who runs away the moment things get difficult. With that, she was gone, leaving Vincent alone in the perfect nursery with his sleeping daughter and the weight of everything he'd thrown away. He sank into the expensive rocking chair he'd had delivered, putting his head in his hands. Outside, the city sparkled with a million lights, each one representing a life, a choice, a path taken or abandoned. He'd spent his entire adult life building an empire, accumulating wealth and power and influence. But sitting in his daughter's nursery at midnight, Vincent realized he'd never felt poorer in his life. Vincent woke to the sound of crying, not Willa's newborn wails, but something deeper, more heartbroken. He glanced at the clock. 3:17 a.m. Rolling out of bed, he pulled on a t-shirt and padded barefoot toward the nursery, expecting to find his daughter awake. Instead, he found Sloane. She was sitting in the rocking chair, Willa sleeping peacefully in her arms, tears streaming silently down her face. Her whole body shook with the effort of crying quietly, trying not to wake the baby. Sloane? Vincent's voice was soft, concerned. What's wrong? Is she sick? Sloane looked up at him, her face crumpled with exhaustion and something deeper, a grief that seemed to come from her very soul. She's fine. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to wake you. You didn't wake me. I heard. He stepped closer, noting the way she held herself so carefully, as if she might shatter. Talk to me. I can't do this anymore. The words came out in a whisper, but they hit Vincent like a shout. I can't pretend this is normal. Living here with you, playing house when we both know it's temporary, when we both know you're going to leave again. Vincent felt his chest constrict. I'm not going anywhere. Aren't you? Sloane's laugh was bitter, broken. Vincent, you've been here 3 days. 3 days of being the perfect potential father, buying everything, saying all the right things. But this isn't sustainable. You have a company to run, a life to get back to, and I can't watch you fall in love with her, and then choose everything else over her the way you chose everything else over me. That's not what happened, isn't it? Sloane stood carefully, still holding Willa, and faced him fully. How many dinners did you miss because of work? How many times did you come home and barely acknowledge I existed because you were thinking about some deal or merger or acquisition? How many nights did I fall asleep alone because you were in your office until midnight? Vincent opened his mouth to defend himself, then closed it, because she was right. Toward the end of their marriage, work had consumed him entirely. He told himself it was for their future, that he was building something that would give them security and freedom. But the truth was, work was easier than feelings. Deals made sense in ways that emotions never did. I was building something for us, he said finally. No, you were hiding from us. From me. From the fact that being married meant being vulnerable to someone every single day. Sloane's voice was steady now, despite her tears. And the moment I needed you most, when I found out I was pregnant and our marriage was falling apart, you disappeared completely. I didn't know you were pregnant, but you knew I was hurting. You knew something was wrong, and instead of fighting for us, you gave up. You ran. She looked down at Willa, sleeping peacefully despite the tension in the room. And now you're here, and you're wonderful with her, and for a moment I can almost pretend that we could be a family. But I can't survive losing you twice, Vincent. I won't put her through that either. Vincent stared at her, seeing for the first time the depth of the damage he'd caused. He'd thought about the divorce in terms of logistics, papers to sign, assets to divide, a clean break that would allow them both to move forward. He'd never considered the ongoing wound he'd left, the way his abandonment had shattered her ability to trust. What do you want me to do? He asked quietly. I want you to be honest. Really honest, not just saying what you think I want to hear. Sloane wiped her eyes with her free hand. Are you here because you feel guilty? Because you feel obligated? Or are you here because you actually want this life? Sleepless nights and crying babies and all the messy, difficult, unglamorous parts of being a family. Vincent was quiet for a long moment, and Sloane's heart sank. His hesitation was answer enough. I don't know, he admitted finally. I don't know what I want. I know I want to be in her life. I know I made a mistake leaving you. But you're right. I don't know if I can do this. The everyday parts, the sacrifice, the putting someone else's needs before my own every single day for the rest of my life. I've never done that for anyone. It was perhaps the most honest thing he'd ever said to her, and it broke her heart completely. Thank you, she whispered, for being honest. Sloane, I'll start looking for an apartment tomorrow. Seriously this time. I'll find something within the week. You don't have to leave, we can figure this out. No, we can't. Sloane's voice was firm now, resolved. Because figuring it out means one of us compromising who we are, and that's not fair to any of us. You need to decide who you want to be, Vincent. And I need to build a life for Willa that doesn't depend on whether or not you decide to stay. She moved past him toward the door, then stopped. You can see her whenever you want. I would never keep her from you. But I can't live in limbo anymore, waiting for you to choose us or choose everything else. I deserve better than that. She deserves better than that. Vincent watched her leave, feeling like his world was tilting off its axis. After she was gone, he sank into the rocking chair, his head in his hands. The nursery that had seemed so perfect earlier now felt like a monument to his own inadequacy. He'd spent his entire adult life making decisive choices, bold moves that had built his fortune and reputation. But when it came to the people who mattered most, he was paralyzed by fear of making the wrong choice, of not being enough, of failing them the way his father had failed his family. Outside, the city was beginning to wake up. Soon it would be another day, another opportunity to make things right, or to let them slip away completely. Vincent had built his success on taking calculated risks, but this wasn't about calculations or profit margins. This was about love and vulnerability, and choosing to be brave enough to build something that couldn't be measured in quarterly reports. As the first light of dawn crept through the windows, Vincent made a decision that would change everything. But first, he had a phone call to make, one that was 6 months overdue. Vincent's hands shook slightly as he dialed the number he hadn't called in over 2 years. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times before a familiar voice answered, groggy with sleep. Vincent? Jesus, what time is it? His brother Cameron's voice was thick with confusion. Are you dying? Because it's 5 in the morning on the West Coast. I have a daughter. The words tumbled out before Vincent could second-guess himself. Her name is Willa. She's 4 weeks old and I just found out 3 days ago. Silence stretched across the line. Vincent could picture Cameron sitting up in bed, running a hand through his hair, a gesture they'd both inherited from their father. Holy shit, Cameron breathed finally. Vincent, how did you not know? Where's the mother? Are you okay? Sloan, it's Sloan's baby. Our baby. Vincent pressed his forehead against the cool window glass, watching the city wake up below. She was pregnant when I asked for the divorce. She never told me. You divorced Sloan? Cameron's voice sharpened with disbelief. When? Why? I thought you two were solid. Vincent had forgotten that he'd never told his brother about the divorce. They spoke maybe twice a year, usually about business or holidays. Personal details had never been their strong suit. 6 months ago, I thought I needed to be free. I thought I was becoming dad, putting work before everything else, and I was going to destroy the best thing in my life. Vincent's voice cracked. So I destroyed it preemptively instead. Jesus, Vincent. Cameron was fully awake now. And now? Now I'm sitting in my daughter's nursery at dawn, wondering how I became the kind of man who could walk away from his family twice in one lifetime. Vincent closed his eyes. Cam, I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to be a father, how to be the kind of man they deserve. Hey, Cameron's voice softened. You remember what you told me when Lily was born? When I called you having a complete meltdown because I was convinced I was going to screw up this perfect little human? Vincent barely remembered. He'd been in the middle of a merger at the time, distracted and impatient with his brother's emotional crisis. You said that love isn't about being perfect. It's about showing up every day even when you don't know what you're doing. Especially then. Cameron paused. You said the fact that I was terrified of failing her meant I was already a better father than Dad ever was. The words hit Vincent like a physical blow. He'd been so focused on his fear of becoming their father that he'd never considered the possibility that caring enough to be afraid was already a fundamental difference. I told Sloan I didn't know if I could do it, Vincent admitted. The everyday parts, the sacrifice, putting someone else first for the rest of my life. And she's leaving, taking Willa and finding her own place because she can't live waiting for me to decide if they're worth choosing. Cameron was quiet for a moment. Are they? What? Are they worth choosing? Because if you have to think about it, then maybe she's right to leave. Vincent opened his eyes, staring at his reflection in the window. They're worth everything. They're worth more than everything I've built, everything I've accomplished. But what if I fail them? What if I'm not capable of being what they need? Then you fail forward, Cameron said simply. You screw up and you apologize and you try again. That's what love is, Vincent. It's not about being perfect. It's about being present. It's about choosing them every day. Even on the days when it's hard, especially on those days. Vincent heard footsteps in the hallway and quickly moved away from the window. Sloan appeared in the nursery doorway, her hair messy from sleep, wearing that same oversized sweater. She looked surprised to see him there. I have to go, Vincent said quietly into the phone. Vincent, Cameron's voice was urgent. Don't let pride or fear cost you everything that matters. Trust me on this one. Vincent ended the call and faced Sloan, who was looking at him with a mixture of confusion and wariness. I was just checking on her, he said, indicating the crib where Willa was still sleeping peacefully. She's fine. She slept through the night for the first time. Sloan's voice was carefully neutral. I came to get her for her morning feeding. Vincent watched as she lifted their daughter with practiced ease, marveling again at how natural she made it look. Sloan, about last night, you don't need to explain anything. Sloan settled into the rocking chair with Willa. You were honest. I appreciate that. I was honest about my fears, Vincent corrected, but I wasn't honest about what I want. Sloan looked up at him and Vincent saw a flicker of something, hope maybe, or just curiosity. I want this, he said, gesturing to the scene before him, his ex-wife feeding their daughter in the nursery he'd built. I want the sleepless nights and the crying and the chaos. I want to learn how to change diapers and understand what different cries mean. I want to be there for her first word and her first steps, and every milestone in between. Vincent, and I want you. The words came out raw, desperate, not because I feel guilty or obligated, but because you're the strongest, most incredible woman I've ever known. Because watching you with her makes me fall in love with you all over again. Because I was an idiot to think I could ever be happy without you. Tears were gathering in Sloane's eyes, but her expression remained guarded. Wanting something and being capable of it are different things. You're right. They are. Vincent knelt beside the rocking chair, bringing himself to her eye level. But I called my brother this morning. Do you know what he told me? Sloane shook her head. He told me that the fact that I'm terrified of failing you means I'm already different from my father. He told me that love isn't about being perfect. It's about showing up every day, even when you don't know what you're doing. And are you willing to do that? Sloane's voice was barely above a whisper. Show up every day even when it's hard? Even when work is demanding and deals are falling apart and there are a million easier ways to spend your time? Vincent reached out and touched Willa's tiny hand where it rested against Sloane's chest. I'm willing to try, and if I mess up, when I mess up, I'm willing to apologize and do better and keep trying until I get it right. Sloane studied his face for a long moment, and Vincent felt like his entire future hung in the balance of whatever she was thinking. I can't go through this again, she said finally. If you change your mind, if you decide this isn't what you want, I won't. Vincent's voice was firm, certain. I've spent 6 months trying to convince myself I made the right choice leaving you, but every day away from you felt like dying slowly. I'm not going anywhere, Sloane. Not ever again. Sloane looked down at Willa, who had finished eating and was looking around with those unfocused newborn eyes. When she looked back up at Vincent, there were tears on her cheeks, but for the first time since he'd come home, she was smiling. She's going to need consistency, Sloane said softly. Routine, stability. She'll have it. And patience. Lots of patience. Babies don't follow schedules or logic. I'll learn. And love. Not just the easy kind, but the kind that shows up at 3 a.m. when she's crying and you don't know why. Vincent leaned forward and kissed Sloane's forehead, breathing in the familiar scent of her hair. She'll have all the love I should have given you from the beginning. As if responding to her parents' conversation, Willa made a soft cooing sound and reached her tiny hand toward Vincent. Without hesitation, he offered his finger, and she grasped it with surprising strength. I think that's her approval, Sloane whispered. And for the first time in 6 months, Vincent felt like he might actually be home. 2 days later, Vincent was learning that being present meant more than just good intentions. He stood in the kitchen at 7 in the morning, holding a screaming Willa while Sloane took her first real shower in days. The baby had been crying for 20 minutes straight, and nothing he tried seemed to help. Please, sweetheart, he murmured, bouncing her gently. What do you need? Are you hungry? Tired? Do you just hate me? Willa's cries only intensified, her tiny face red with indignation. Vincent felt sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool morning air. How did Sloane make this look so effortless? The doorbell rang, cutting through Willa's wails. Vincent frowned. They weren't expecting anyone, and the concierge usually called before sending visitors up. Still holding his screaming daughter, he made his way to the door and opened it without checking the peephole first. His blood froze. Standing in the hallway was Isabelle Moreau, his business partner and former lover. She was stunning as always, tall and elegant in a cream-colored suit that probably cost more than most people's rent, her dark hair pulled back in a perfect chignon. Her green eyes widened as she took in the scene. Vincent in rumpled clothes, unshaven, holding a crying baby. Vincent? Her French accent made his name sound like music even in her confusion. Whose child is this? Isabelle. Vincent's mind raced. What are you doing here? You missed our breakfast meeting and our conference call with the Hong Kong investors. Marcus said you've canceled everything for the week, but you won't return calls. Her eyes moved from Vincent to the baby and back again. I was worried something had happened to you. Willa chose that moment to let out an ear-piercing shriek, and Vincent winced. She's mine, he said simply. This is my daughter, Willa. Isabel's perfectly composed expression cracked slightly. Your daughter. But Vincent, you don't have children. You said you never wanted. Things change. Vincent tried bouncing Willa again, but she only cried harder. This isn't a good time, Isabel. We can discuss business later. Business? Isabel stepped closer, her eyes narrowing. Vincent, we're supposed to close the Morrison deal next week. You've been working on this for 6 months. You can't just disappear because of some baby. The dismissive way she said some baby made Vincent's jaw clench. This baby is my daughter. Where did she come from? Who is the mother? Isabel's voice was sharp now, all pretense of concern dropping away. Is this some kind of breakdown? Because if you're having personal issues, we need to address them before they affect the company. Before Vincent could respond, he heard footsteps behind him. Sloane appeared in the hallway, her hair still damp from the shower, wearing jeans and a soft blue sweater. She took in the scene immediately, Vincent struggling with their crying daughter, and the stunning woman in the doorway whose presence seemed to fill the space with tension. Is everything okay? Sloane asked, moving to Vincent's side. Everything's fine, Vincent said quickly. Sloane, this is Isabelle Moreau, my business partner. Isabelle, this is Sloane, my wife. The lie slipped out before Vincent could stop it, but he didn't correct himself. Something about the way Isabel was looking at Sloane, like she was evaluating a competitor, made him want to protect whatever fragile progress he and Sloane had made. Your wife? Isabel's eyebrows rose. But I thought you were divorced. It's complicated, Vincent said. At the same time, Sloane reached for Willa. Here, let me, Sloane murmured, taking the baby from Vincent's arms. Almost immediately, Willa's cries softened to small hiccups. She probably just needed her mama. Vincent watched in amazement as Sloane swayed gently, making soft shushing sounds, and Willa settled completely. It was like magic, the kind of maternal instinct he was beginning to realize couldn't be learned from books or bought with money. How do you do that? He asked softly. Practice. Sloane smiled at him, and for a moment they were in their own bubble, just the three of them. Isabel cleared her throat loudly. I'm sorry to interrupt this domestic scene, but Vincent, we really need to talk. The Morrison deal can wait. Vincent's voice was firm. Everything can wait. Wait? Isabel laughed, but there was no humor in it. Vincent, this is a $200 million acquisition. You can't just put it on hold because you're playing house. The words hit like a slap. Vincent felt Sloane stiffen beside him, and when he glanced at her, he saw the walls going back up in her eyes. This was exactly what she'd been afraid of, that real life would intrude and he'd choose business over them. I'm not playing anything, Vincent said quietly but with steel in his voice. This is my family. Family? Isabel's eyes flicked between Vincent and Sloane with undisguised skepticism. Vincent, you told me yourself that you weren't cut out for marriage, that you needed your freedom. Was that all lies? Sloane's face went pale. I'll take Willa to her room, she said quietly, already backing away from the door. Sloane, wait. Vincent started, but she was already disappearing down the hallway with their daughter. Isabel watched her go with satisfaction. Really, Vincent? A baby? This isn't like you at all. You're right, Vincent said, stepping into the hallway and closing the door behind him, forcing Isabel to move back. It's not like me. The man you knew. The man who put business before everything else, who was so afraid of commitment that he sabotaged his own marriage. That's not who I want to be anymore. Vincent, you're not thinking clearly. This woman, this baby, they're making you lose sight of what's important. Your company, your future. They are my future. Vincent's voice cut through her protests. Isabel, I appreciate your concern, but this conversation is over. Reschedule the Morrison meeting. I'll be back in the office next week. And if they won't wait? If we lose the deal because you're having some kind of midlife crisis? Vincent met her eyes steadily. Then we lose the deal. Some things are more important than money. Isabel stared at him as if he'd grown a second head. I don't know who you are anymore. Good, Vincent said, because I didn't like who I was before. After Isabel left, Vincent stood in the hallway for a long moment, steeling himself for what he'd find inside. When he entered the apartment, it was quiet. Too quiet. He found Sloane in the nursery, sitting in the rocking chair with Willa, but her expression was distant, closed off. She's beautiful, Sloane said without looking at him. Your business partner. Very sophisticated, very put together. Sloane, is she why you wanted the divorce? Sloane's voice was calm, but Vincent could hear the hurt underneath. Because it would make sense. A woman like that, no complications, no demands on your time. No. Vincent knelt beside the chair, forcing her to look at him. There's nothing between Isabel and me. Not anymore. Not for a long time. But there was something. Vincent hesitated, then nodded. Before we got married. But it was never serious. Never what? Never love. Vincent reached out and touched Sloane's hand where it rested on Willa's back. It was convenience. Compatibility in business translating to something physical. But it wasn't real, Sloane. It wasn't what we had. Sloane was quiet for a long moment. She looked at me like I was an obstacle, like something inconvenient that needed to be dealt with. She doesn't matter. Doesn't she? Vincent, she's right about one thing. You have responsibilities. A company to run, deals to close. You can't just ignore all of that indefinitely. I'm not ignoring it, I'm prioritizing. Vincent stood and began pacing, running his hands through his hair. For my entire adult life, I've let business consume everything. I missed family dinners, vacations, quiet moments with you because there was always another deal, another crisis, another opportunity. I'm not doing that anymore. And what happens when the next crisis comes? When there's a deal that could make or break your company? When choosing us means losing millions of dollars? Vincent stopped pacing and looked at her. Then I choose us. Just like that? Just like that. He moved back to her side, kneeling again so they were eye level. Sloan, money can be made again. Companies can be rebuilt. But if I lose you again, if I lose her, he gestured to Willa, sleeping peacefully in Sloane's arms. That's not something I can fix with a better strategy or a bigger offer. Sloan studied his face, searching for any sign of doubt or hesitation. Your business partner doesn't think you mean it. My business partner doesn't know me as well as she thinks she does. Vincent reached out and brushed a strand of hair behind Sloane's ear. And she's about to find out that the man she thought she knew doesn't exist anymore. Willa stirred in Sloane's arms, making a soft sound that drew both their attention. When she opened her eyes, she seemed to look directly at Vincent, and something in his chest swelled with fierce protectiveness. I have some calls to make, he said quietly. Some things to rearrange. The Morrison deal can wait, or it can find another buyer. But I'm not missing another moment of this little girl's life for a boardroom. As Vincent left the nursery to make his calls, Sloan watched him go with something that might have been hope beginning to bloom in her chest. For the first time since he'd walked back into their lives, she was starting to believe that maybe, just maybe, he really meant it this time. Vincent spent the afternoon in his office making calls, restructuring meetings, and essentially turning his business world upside down. Each conversation felt like shedding an old skin, the version of himself that would have chosen profit over presence, strategy over love. When he emerged 3 hours later, he found Sloan in the living room with Willa, who was having what appeared to be her first real alert period of the day. The baby's eyes were wide and curious, tracking movement and light with the intense focus that newborns sometimes displayed. She's been awake for almost an hour, Sloan said softly, not looking up from their daughter, just looking around, taking everything in. I think she's starting to really see the world. Vincent settled beside them on the couch, close enough to touch but not presuming. What's she thinking about, do you suppose? Probably wondering why everything is so bright and loud compared to where she came from. Sloane's voice held a gentle humor. The womb is dark and quiet and warm. This must all seem very overwhelming. I can relate to that, Vincent murmured, watching as Willa's tiny hand grasped at the air. Feeling overwhelmed by a new world you're not sure you're equipped for. Sloan glanced at him sideways. How did your calls go? I postponed the Morrison deal indefinitely, handed the Yamamoto project to Marcus, told my assistant to clear my calendar for the next month. Vincent's voice was matter of fact, but Sloan could see the tension in his shoulders. Isabel wasn't pleased. A month? Sloan couldn't hide her surprise. Vincent, that's a lot. It's not enough. He turned to face her fully. Sloan, I missed the first month of her life. I missed you being pregnant, the birth, her first weeks. I can't get that back, but I can make sure I don't miss anything else. But your company will survive without me for a few weeks. If it can't, then I haven't built it as well as I thought. Vincent reached out hesitantly, and when Sloan didn't pull away, he touched Willa's tiny fist. She's only going to be this small once. These moments, they don't come back. Sloan felt something shift in her chest, a crack in the wall she'd built around her heart. This was the man she'd fallen in love with, the one who could see past the immediate demands of success to what really mattered. Your phone has been buzzing for the last hour, she said quietly. Vincent pulled out his phone and glanced at the screen. 15 missed calls from Isabel, 12 text messages and several emails marked urgent. He turned the phone off without reading any of them. Vincent, whatever it is, it can wait. He set the phone aside and focused entirely on Willa, who was now making soft cooing sounds. Hello, beautiful girl. Are you having a good day with Mama? Willa's response was a tiny yawn that made both adults smile. But their peaceful moment was interrupted by the sharp sound of the doorbell. 3 quick, impatient rings that somehow conveyed annoyance. Vincent's jaw tightened. I'll handle it. He opened the door to find Isabel again, but this time she wasn't alone. Marcus Webb, Vincent's CFO and oldest friend, stood beside her, looking deeply uncomfortable. Vincent, Marcus said before Isabel could speak. I'm sorry to bother you, but we have a situation. What kind of situation? Isabel stepped forward, her green eyes flashing with barely contained anger. The kind where your sudden abandonment of responsibility is about to cost us everything we've built. I haven't abandoned anything. I've delegated. You've disappeared. Isabel's voice rose. The Morrison people are threatening to walk. The Hong Kong investors are questioning your commitment. And now I'm hearing rumors that you've had some kind of breakdown. Vincent felt his temper flare. Who exactly is spreading rumors about my mental state? Marcus shifted uncomfortably. Vincent, people are talking. When someone like you suddenly cancels everything and stops returning calls, well, people assume the worst. And what are people assuming exactly? That you've lost your edge, Isabel said bluntly. That fatherhood has made you soft. That you're no longer the Vincent Devereaux who built this empire. Vincent heard footsteps behind him and knew without turning that Sloane had appeared in the hallway, probably drawn by the raised voices. He could feel her listening, could sense her tension even without looking at her. Maybe they're right, Vincent said quietly. Maybe I'm not that man anymore. Marcus's eyes widened. Vincent, you don't mean that, don't I? The man who built this company sacrificed everything for success. His marriage, his relationships, any chance at a real life. If that's what it takes to maintain this empire, then maybe it's time to find a different way. Or maybe it's time to remember who you really are. Isabel stepped closer, her voice dropping to the intimate tone she'd once used in private moments. Vincent, you're brilliant, you're driven. You're a force of nature in the business world. Don't let domestic responsibilities diminish that. The way she said domestic responsibilities made it sound like a disease, and Vincent felt something cold settle in his stomach. Those domestic responsibilities, he said carefully, are my daughter and the woman I love. They're not diminishing anything. They're giving me something to build toward instead of just building for the sake of building. The woman you love? Isabel's laugh was sharp. Vincent, you divorced her 6 months ago. You told me yourself that marriage was a mistake, that you felt trapped. I was wrong. Vincent's voice cut through her words like a blade. About everything. About what I wanted. About what mattered. About what would make me happy. You're making a mistake. Isabel pressed. This whole situation, the baby, the reconciliation, it's going to destroy everything you've worked for. No, Vincent said firmly. Walking away from them would destroy everything that actually matters. Marcus cleared his throat. Vincent, I understand wanting to be there for your family, but surely there's a middle ground. You could come back part-time, just handle the essential. There's always something essential, Vincent interrupted. There's always one more deal, one more crisis, one more opportunity that can't wait. I've been telling myself just this one thing for 15 years and it never ends. Because that's the price of success. Isabel's composure finally cracked completely. You think you can just walk away from everything you've built and play house with your ex-wife and some baby? The silence that followed was deafening. Vincent felt, rather than saw, Sloane flinch behind him, and something dangerous flickered in his eyes. That baby, he said, his voice deadly quiet, is my daughter, and if you ever refer to her as some baby again, this conversation will be over permanently. Isabel's face flushed. Vincent, I didn't mean. Yes, you did. Vincent stepped back, effectively blocking the doorway. You meant exactly what you said. You see my family as an inconvenience, an obstacle to profit, and that tells me everything I need to know about your priorities. My priorities? Isabel's voice rose again. My priorities are keeping the company we built together from falling apart because you've decided to have a midlife crisis. This isn't a midlife crisis. This is me finally growing up. Vincent's voice was steady, resolved. And if you can't understand the difference, then maybe we need to discuss restructuring our partnership. Marcus's face went pale. Vincent, you're not thinking clearly. I'm thinking more clearly than I have in years. Vincent looked between his business partner and his oldest friend. I'm going to ask you both to leave now. When I'm ready to discuss business again, I'll call you. And when will that be? Isabel demanded. Vincent heard a soft sound behind him, Willa making one of her tiny baby noises, and his expression softened immediately. When my daughter doesn't need me every moment of every day, when my family feels secure in my commitment to them, when I've proven that they come first, not just in words but in actions. He met Isabel's eyes steadily, however long that takes. After he closed the door, Vincent stood with his back to it for a long moment, listening to the muffled sound of angry voices in the hallway. When he finally turned around, he found Sloane standing in the living room doorway holding Willa, her expression unreadable. That was, she started, then stopped. Necessary, Vincent finished. Long overdue, actually. She's going to make your life difficult. Let her try. Vincent moved toward them, drawn by the sight of his daughter in Sloane's arms. The only life I care about is right here. Sloane studied his face, searching for any sign that he might be wavering, that the pressure from his business world might be getting to him. Instead, she saw something she'd never seen before. Complete certainty. Vincent, she said softly, are you sure about this? Because there's no going back. If you choose us, really choose us, it has to be permanent. I can't survive losing you again. Vincent reached out and cupped her face in his hands, looking directly into her eyes. Sloane Bennett, you are my life. You and this little girl are my life. Everything else is just noise. And for the first time since he'd walked back into their world, Sloane allowed herself to believe him completely. 3 weeks later, Vincent was discovering that choosing love over ambition was the easy part. Living that choice every day, especially at 3 a.m. when Willa was teething and screaming, was considerably more challenging. He stood in the kitchen, warming a bottle with one hand while bouncing a red-faced, furious Willa with the other. His hair was disheveled, his eyes bloodshot from weeks of broken sleep, and his usually pristine appearance was nowhere to be found. He wore an old college t-shirt that had spit-up stains on the shoulder and pajama pants that had seen better days. "Come on, sweetheart," he murmured, testing the bottle temperature on his wrist the way Sloane had taught him. "I know your mouth hurts, but this will help, I promise." Willa's response was to arch her back and cry even harder, her tiny fists flailing with indignation. Vincent felt sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool morning air. This was their third wake-up of the night, and he could hear Sloane stirring in the bedroom. She'd been up with the baby until 2 a.m., and he'd insisted on taking this shift so she could sleep. The apartment felt different now, lived in, chaotic, real. Gone were the pristine surfaces and museum-like perfection. In their place were burp cloths draped over furniture, a swing in the living room, and toys scattered across expensive marble floors. The transformation should have bothered him, but instead, Vincent found himself loving the beautiful mess of it all. "Vincent." Sloane's voice was thick with sleep as she appeared in the kitchen doorway. Her honey blonde hair was pulled up in a messy bun, and she wore one of his old dress shirts over pajama shorts. Even exhausted and rumpled, she was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. "Go back to bed," he said softly, still bouncing Willa. "I've got this. She's been crying for 20 minutes. Let me—" "No." Vincent's voice was gentle but firm. "You need sleep. We both know you'll be up again in a few hours anyway." Sloane watched as he tried to coax Willa to take the bottle, marveling at the transformation in him. 3 weeks ago, he'd been terrified to hold her. Now he moved with growing confidence, instinctively adjusting his hold when she fussed, speaking to her in soft tones that seemed to calm her even when nothing else worked. "The teething is getting worse," Sloane observed, moving to the cabinet to retrieve infant pain reliever. "Doctor, Peterson said we could give her this if she seems really uncomfortable." Vincent nodded, accepting the medicine. As he administered the tiny dose, his phone buzzed on the counter. Sloane glanced at the screen and saw Isabel's name. Again. She'd been calling daily, sometimes multiple times for the past 3 weeks. "She's persistent," Sloane said quietly. "She's desperate." Vincent didn't even look at the phone. "The Morrison deal fell through yesterday. The investors pulled out of the Hong Kong project. Stock prices are dropping." Sloane felt her stomach tighten. "Vincent, maybe you should..." "Should what? Run back to fix everything and prove Isabel right?" Vincent finally succeeded in getting Willa to take the bottle, and her cries subsided to soft whimpers. "Let it fall apart, Sloane. If the company can't survive without me for a few weeks, then I built it wrong. But all that money, all those years of work, are meaningless if I lose this." Vincent looked down at Willa, who was finally drinking peacefully, her tiny hand curled around his finger. "I spent 15 years building an empire I thought would make me happy. But I was never happy, not really, not until I had this." Sloane moved closer, drawn by something in his voice, a contentment she'd never heard before, even in their best times during their marriage. "Even at 3 a.m. when she's screaming and you haven't slept in weeks?" "Especially then." Vincent's smile was tired but genuine. "Because this is real, Sloane. This matters. Boardrooms and profit margins, they're just games. But this little girl depending on me, trusting me to take care of her, this is the most important thing I'll ever do." As if responding to his words, Willa's eyes fluttered closed, the bottle forgotten as she drifted towards sleep. Vincent set it aside and held her against his chest, swaying gently. "You're different," Sloane said softly. "Not just with her, but everything about you is different." "Different how?" "Calmer, more present. During our marriage, even when you were physically here, part of you was always somewhere else, thinking about work, planning the next deal. But now," she searched for the words, "now you're completely here." Vincent was quiet for a moment, considering her observation. "I used to think that being successful meant being indispensable, that if I wasn't constantly moving and strategizing and building, I wasn't valuable. But holding her, Knowing that she needs me, not because of what I can do or buy or achieve, but just because I'm her father, it's the most valuable I've ever felt. They stood in comfortable silence, watching their daughter sleep. The city was beginning to wake up outside their windows. Early commuters, delivery trucks, the distant hum of traffic. Vincent used to be part of that rush, that constant movement towards something always just out of reach. Now he felt like he'd found what he'd been running toward all along. "There's something else," Sloane said after a few minutes. "I got a call yesterday from my landlord." Vincent's attention sharpened. "Your landlord?" "The apartment I was going to rent. He found someone else, someone who could move in immediately." Sloane's voice was carefully neutral. "So I need to start looking again." Vincent felt something cold settle in his stomach. Over the past 3 weeks, they'd settled into a routine that felt almost natural, sharing morning coffee, taking turns with night feedings, quiet conversations while Willa slept. The idea of her leaving, of going back to separate lives, felt wrong in every possible way. "You don't have to leave," he said quietly. "Vincent, I know what I said before about this being temporary, but I don't want it to be temporary." He looked at her directly, and Sloane saw vulnerability in his expression that took her breath away. "I want you to stay, both of you, not as ex-spouses sharing custody, but as us, as a family." "What exactly are you saying?" Vincent carefully transferred the sleeping Willa to her bassinet, then turned to face Sloane fully. "I'm saying I want to try again. Really try, not just because of Willa, but because I never stopped loving you. Because these past 3 weeks have been the happiest I've been in years, even with the sleepless nights and the chaos and the complete upending of everything I thought I wanted." Sloane stared at him, her heart pounding. "Vincent, we can't just pretend the last 6 months didn't happen. We can't ignore the reasons you left. The reasons I left were because I was a coward who was afraid of how much I needed you." Vincent stepped closer, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "I was terrified that loving you as much as I did made me weak, made me vulnerable. So I convinced myself I needed to be free, that I'd be stronger alone. And now I know that loving you, loving her doesn't make me weak. It makes me brave enough to be the man you both deserve." Vincent reached out and touched her face gently. "I know I hurt you. I know I broke trust that might take years to rebuild. But if you'll let me, I want to spend every day proving that I meant what I said, that you and Willa are my life now." Sloane felt tears gathering in her eyes. Every instinct told her to protect herself, to keep the walls up, to remember how devastating it had been when he left before. But looking at him now, rumpled and exhausted and more real than she'd ever seen him, she found those walls crumbling. "I'm scared," she whispered. "So am I." Vincent's thumb brushed away a tear that had escaped. "But I'm more scared of living without you than I am of the risk of trying again." Before Sloane could respond, Willa stirred in her bassinet, making one of those soft baby sounds that meant she was dreaming. Both adults looked toward her, and in that moment Sloane saw their future laid out like a path, not perfect, not without challenges, but full of love and possibility. "If we do this," she said quietly, "it's forever. No more running when things get difficult. No more choosing work over family when the pressure gets intense. Forever," Vincent agreed without hesitation. "And if your company fails, if you lose everything you built, you can't resent us for it. The only thing I'd resent is if I lost you again." Vincent pulled her closer until they were standing in the space where they'd once shared morning coffee as newlyweds, where they'd talked about dreams and plans and the future they'd build together. "Everything else can be rebuilt, but this, us, this is irreplaceable." Sloane looked up into his face, seeing the man she'd fallen in love with all those years ago, but also seeing someone new, someone who'd finally learned what truly mattered. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay? Okay, let's try again." A smile broke across her face, the first genuinely happy smile Vincent had seen from her since he'd come home. "Let's be a family." Vincent's response was to kiss her, soft and sweet and full of promises for tomorrow. And in her bassinet, as if she approved of her parents' decision, Willa slept peacefully through the night for the very first time. The morning started like many others had over the past month, Vincent making coffee while Sloane nursed Willa in the living room, the three of them settling into a routine that felt as natural as breathing. But their peaceful domestic scene was shattered by the sound of multiple cars pulling up outside and urgent voices in the lobby. Vincent's phone, which he'd kept on silent for weeks, suddenly began buzzing incessantly. Text after text, call after call, until the screen was a blur of notifications. "Vincent," Sloane's voice was tight with concern. Something's wrong. Before he could respond, the apartment's landline rang, a number only a few people knew, reserved for true emergencies. Vincent answered with growing dread. Mr. Devereaux? His assistant Rebecca's voice was strained, professional composure cracking. Sir, you need to know. Isabel is here, with the board, and federal investigators. Vincent's blood ran cold. What kind of investigators? SEC. They're saying there are irregularities in the Morrison deal documents. Allegations of insider trading. Rebecca's voice dropped to a whisper. Sir, they have warrants. The words hit Vincent like a physical blow. He sank into a chair, his mind racing through possibilities, implications, the careful legal structure he'd built around every deal. Vincent? Sloane had moved closer, still holding Willa, her face pale with worry. What's happening? I have to go, he said, already moving toward the bedroom to get dressed. There's some kind of investigation. Investigation? Sloane followed him, her voice rising. Vincent, what kind of investigation? I don't know. Something about the Morrison deal. Insider trading allegations. Vincent pulled on a suit with mechanical precision, his mind shifting into crisis mode. It's probably nothing. Some disgruntled competitor making accusations. But I need to be there. Sloane watched him transform before her eyes, the gentle, present father disappearing as the ruthless businessman emerged. It was like watching him put on armor, and it terrified her. How long will you be gone? I don't know. A few hours, maybe longer depending on what they want. Vincent was already reaching for his phone, scrolling through the dozens of missed calls. I need to call my lawyer, find out what exactly. Vincent. Sloane's voice cut through his mounting panic. Look at me. He stopped, finally meeting her eyes. In them he saw fear, not of the investigation but of him leaving, of him being pulled back into the world that had consumed him before. I'll be back, he said softly. This doesn't change anything, doesn't it? Sloane shifted Willa to her hip, her free hand unconsciously protective. This is exactly what I was afraid of. The moment something goes wrong with your business, you're ready to drop everything and run back to fix it. This is different. This is serious. And we're not. The words came out sharper than Sloane intended, but she didn't take them back. Vincent, you said we were your priority. You said nothing would come before us. Nothing will. This is about protecting what we've built so we can have a future. No. Sloane's voice was steady now, resolved. This is about you still believing that your worth is tied to your business success. This is about you not trusting that we'll love you even if you lose everything. Vincent stared at her, his phone still buzzing in his hand. Sloane, they're saying I committed federal crimes. I could go to prison. I could lose everything anyway. Then we'll figure it out together. Sloane moved closer, her eyes never leaving his. But if you walk out that door now, if you choose handling this crisis over staying here with us, then you're proving that nothing has really changed. That's not fair, isn't it? Vincent, you've been here for a month. 1 month of proving you've changed, of showing up for us. But the moment your old world calls, you're ready to abandon this one. Vincent felt torn in half. Everything in his business training told him to go, to take control, to fix the crisis before it spiraled beyond repair. But looking at Sloane, seeing the fear and disappointment in her eyes, he realized she was right. This was the test he'd been unconsciously waiting for. The moment when he'd have to choose definitively between the man he'd been and the man he wanted to become. What if I don't go? He asked quietly. What if the allegations are true? What if someone did something illegal in my name? What if by not being there I make everything worse? Then you hire the best lawyers money can buy and let them handle it. Sloane's voice softened slightly. Vincent, you told me once that if the company couldn't survive without you for a few weeks, you'd built it wrong. Well, if it can't survive this without you being physically present to micromanage every detail, then maybe it deserves to fail. The words hung between them like a challenge. Vincent's phone buzzed again. Another urgent call, another crisis demanding his immediate attention. He looked at the screen, then at Sloane, then at Willa, who was watching him with those serious blue eyes that seemed to see straight through to his soul. Mr. Devereaux. Rebecca's voice came through the phone's speaker. Apparently he'd answered without realizing it. Sir, they're asking for you specifically. Isabel says if you don't come immediately, she'll have to take emergency control of the company to protect the shareholders. Vincent ended the call and turned his phone off. Vincent, what are you doing? Sloane's eyes widened. I'm choosing you. He set the phone on the dresser and began taking off his suit jacket. I'm choosing us. Whatever happens with the business, we'll face it together, but I'm not walking away from this family again. But the investigation will proceed with or without me hovering over it. Vincent hung up his jacket and moved to Sloane, taking her face in his hands. You're right. If I leave now, I'm proving that I haven't really changed, that when push comes to shove, I'll always choose business over us. Vincent, I don't want you to lose everything because of me. I won't lose everything. I'll lose money, maybe the company, possibly my reputation in certain circles. But those things aren't everything. He leaned down and kissed her forehead. Everything is right here. Everything that matters is in this room. Sloane searched his face, looking for any sign of doubt or resentment. Instead, she saw peace, the kind of certainty that came from finally making the right choice. What if they arrest you? Then you'll visit me in prison and tell Willa stories about her daddy until I get out. Vincent's attempt at humor fell flat, but his resolve didn't waver. Sloane, I've spent my entire adult life running toward success and away from anything that made me vulnerable. I'm done running. Before Sloane could respond, the apartment's intercom buzzed. The doorman's voice crackled through the speaker. Mr. Devereaux, there are several people here to see you. They say it's urgent business. Vincent looked at the intercom, then at Sloane, then made his choice. Tell them Mr. Devereaux is unavailable, he said into the speaker, and that all business inquiries should be directed to his legal counsel. Sir, they're quite insistent. Then they can be insistent somewhere else. Vincent's voice was firm. I'm not available. He turned back to Sloane, who was staring at him with wonder, and something that might have been awe. You just turned away federal investigators, she said quietly. I just chose my family over my fear. Vincent reached for Willa, who came to him easily, settling against his chest with the trust that never failed to humble him. Whatever happens next, we face it together. From outside, they could hear car doors slamming, engines starting, the sound of Vincent's old world retreating without him. Inside the apartment, Willa made a soft cooing sound, and both her parents smiled despite the uncertainty of their future. So what do we do now? Sloane asked. Vincent looked around their home, messy, chaotic, full of love and possibility. Now we have breakfast, and then maybe we take Willa for a walk in the park, and then we figure out how to build a life that doesn't depend on anything except how much we love each other. And if the investigators come back, then we'll deal with it when they do. Vincent's arm tightened around both his girls. But we'll deal with it together. For the first time in her life, Sloane felt truly secure in Vincent's love. Not because he'd promised to stay, but because when faced with the ultimate test, he'd chosen them without hesitation. Whatever came next, they would face it as a family. 6 months later, Vincent stood in the kitchen of their new apartment. Smaller, simpler, but somehow more beautiful than the penthouse had ever been. Willa, now 7 months old and sitting up on her own, babbled happily in her high chair while Vincent attempted to make pancakes from scratch. His technique was questionable, but his enthusiasm was boundless. Dada! Willa squealed, clapping her tiny hands as flour puffed around Vincent like snow. That's right, sweetheart. Daddy is making a magnificent mess. Vincent grinned at his daughter, marveling as he did every day at how much joy she brought to the simplest moments. The past 6 months had been a whirlwind of legal battles, financial losses, and life-changing decisions. The SEC investigation had revealed that Isabel had indeed engaged in insider trading, using Vincent's name and reputation to cover her tracks. While Vincent was ultimately cleared of all criminal charges, the scandal had destroyed his company's reputation and most of its value. The penthouse was gone, sold to pay legal fees and settle civil suits. The empire he'd spent 15 years building had crumbled in a matter of months. By any objective measure, Vincent Devereaux had lost everything, and he had never been happier. Good morning, my loves. Sloane appeared in the kitchen doorway, her hair still messy from sleep, wearing one of Vincent's old college sweatshirts. She was more beautiful to him now than she'd ever been, not because she'd changed, but because he'd finally learned how to see her clearly. Mama! Willa bounced in her chair, reaching for Sloane with grabby hands. Good morning, baby girl. Sloane kissed the top of Willa's head, then moved to Vincent, standing on her toes to kiss his cheek. How are the pancakes coming? Well, they're definitely an adventure. Vincent gestured to the lumpy batter with a rueful smile. I may have overestimated my culinary abilities. Good thing I love you for other reasons. Sloane bumped his hip with hers, the casual intimacy of the gesture still making Vincent's heart skip. Besides, Willa doesn't care if they're perfect. She just cares that Daddy made them. Vincent set down his whisk and turned to face her fully. Even after all these months of rebuilding their relationship, moments like this still felt like miracles. Ordinary, domestic, perfect miracles. "I got a call yesterday," he said quietly, "from Cameron." Sloane's expression grew attentive. Vincent's relationship with his brother had deepened significantly over the past months, as if losing everything else had helped him remember what actually mattered. "He wants to offer me a partnership in his firm. Nothing huge, nothing glamorous. Just honest work helping small businesses with their financial planning." Vincent searched Sloane's face for her reaction. It would mean starting over completely, building something new from the ground up. "What did you tell him?" "That I needed to talk to my wife first." The word wife made Sloane's breath catch. They'd remarried 3 months ago in a small ceremony at City Hall, with only Willa as their witness and a court clerk who'd been charmed into taking photos. It had been nothing like their first wedding. No designer dress, no elaborate reception, no hundreds of guests. Just the two of them, their daughter, and promises that meant everything because they'd already been tested by loss. "Your wife thinks," Sloane said softly, "that you should do whatever makes you happy, but she also thinks you already know what that is." Vincent nodded, understanding her perfectly. "I want to take it, not because I need to rebuild an empire or prove anything to anyone, but because I want to build something with my hands and my mind that I can be proud of. Something that adds value to people's lives instead of just accumulating wealth. Then that's what we'll do." "We?" Vincent raised an eyebrow. "Did you think you were getting rid of me that easily?" "I've been thinking about going back to school, maybe getting my teaching certificate. I always wanted to work with children." Sloane glanced at Willa, who was now trying to catch the sunbeams streaming through the window. "Turns out I have a talent for understanding small humans." Vincent felt his chest swell with pride and love. "You'd be an amazing teacher. We could build something together. Something that matters. Something that lasts." They were interrupted by the sound of the doorbell. Vincent frowned. They weren't expecting anyone, and their few close friends usually called first. "I'll get it," he said, wiping flour from his hands. When he opened the door, he found a young woman in an expensive suit, holding a briefcase and looking nervous. "Mr. Devereaux, my name is Jennifer Walsh. I'm an attorney representing the Yamamoto Corporation." Vincent's expression grew wary. The Yamamoto deal had been one of the casualties of his company's collapse, and he'd assumed all legal loose ends had been tied up months ago. "What can I do for you, Ms. Walsh?" "Actually, it's what we can do for you." She opened her briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. "It seems there was an error in the asset liquidation, a significant oversight." Vincent glanced back at Sloane, who had moved closer, holding Willa. "What kind of oversight?" "The intellectual property rights to the renewable energy patents you developed 3 years ago. They were held in a separate trust that wasn't part of the liquidation proceedings." Jennifer held out the folder. "Mr. Yamamoto has been trying to track you down for months. His company is very interested in purchasing these patents." Vincent accepted the folder with trembling hands. He remembered the renewable energy project. It had been a passion project, something he'd funded personally because he believed in its potential to change the world. In the chaos of the company's collapse, he'd completely forgotten about it. "How much are we talking about?" Sloane asked quietly. Jennifer named a figure that made both Vincent and Sloane's eyes widen. It wasn't empire money, but it was enough to secure their future, to give them the freedom to choose their path without financial pressure. "There's one condition," Jennifer continued. "Mr. Yamamoto insists on meeting with you personally. He wants to discuss the possibility of you consulting on the project's implementation." Vincent looked at the folder, then at Sloane, then at Willa, who was reaching for the papers with curious hands. "When does he want to meet?" "He's in New York now. He could meet as early as this afternoon if you're available." A year ago, Vincent would have dropped everything and raced to the meeting. 6 months ago, he might have agonized over the decision. Now he barely hesitated. "Could we reschedule for next week? Today is pancake day with my daughter, and I don't want to miss it." Jennifer looked surprised but nodded. "Of course, I'll arrange something for early next week." After she left, Vincent closed the door and leaned against it, still holding the folder. "Vincent?" Sloane's voice was soft with wonder. "This could change everything." "No," Vincent said, moving back to her and Willa. "This could change our circumstances, but everything that matters has already changed." He set the folder aside and picked up his daughter, spinning her around until she giggled with delight. "Besides, we have pancakes to make, and I have a feeling these are going to be the best pancakes in the history of pancakes. Even if they're lumpy? Especially if they're lumpy." Vincent kissed Sloane thoroughly, then looked around their small, flour-dusted kitchen. You know what I realized? I spent 15 years building an empire that I thought would make me feel successful. But standing here with flour in my hair and baby food on my shirt making breakfast for my family, this is what success actually feels like. Sloane wrapped her arms around his waist, careful not to squish Willa between them. I love you, Vincent Devereaux. Not because you're successful or wealthy or powerful, but because you learned how to choose love over fear. Best choice I ever made, Vincent murmured against her hair. From her perch in her father's arms, Willa clapped her hands and babbled something that sounded suspiciously like, "Love you too." And in their small, imperfect, flour-covered kitchen, surrounded by the beautiful chaos of real life, Vincent finally understood what it meant to have everything. 2 years later, the late afternoon sun streamed through the windows of the small house in Westchester, casting golden light across hardwood floors scattered with toys. Vincent sat cross-legged on the living room carpet, his sleeves rolled up, helping 2-year-old Willa build a tower with colorful blocks. She was chattering away in the mixed language of toddlers, half real words, half delighted nonsense, her dark hair curling around her face in the same way Vincent's did when it got too long. "Daddy, big one!" Willa held up a red block, her blue eyes sparkling with the kind of joy that only small children could summon over something so simple. "That's right, sweetheart. The big red one goes on top." Vincent carefully helped her place the block, marveling as he did every day at how much she'd grown, how her personality was emerging in brilliant flashes of curiosity and stubbornness and pure love. The partnership with Cameron had flourished beyond either brother's expectations. Vincent had discovered that helping small businesses plan for their futures gave him a satisfaction that accumulating wealth for its own sake never had. He worked reasonable hours, came home for dinner every night, and had never once regretted trading his empire for this life. The renewable energy patents had indeed changed their circumstances, providing enough financial security that Sloane had been able to finish her teaching degree, and Vincent could be selective about the clients he took on. But more importantly, the experience had taught them both that their happiness wasn't dependent on external validation or financial success. It was built on the foundation they'd created together. "Vincent?" Sloane's voice called from the kitchen where she was preparing dinner. "Could you check the mail? I think the results from the fertility clinic might have come today." Vincent's heart skipped a beat. They'd been trying for another baby for 6 months, and last week's tests would determine if their dreams of giving Willa a sibling were possible. After everything they'd been through, the idea of expanding their family felt like another kind of miracle. "Come on, little architect," Vincent said to Willa, scooping her up. "Let's go check the mail with Mama." Willa giggled and wrapped her arms around his neck, the gesture so trusting and natural that it still made Vincent's chest tight with love. In the kitchen, Sloane was stirring something that smelled amazing, her hair pulled back in a ponytail, wearing jeans and one of Vincent's old shirts. She looked up when they entered, and Vincent saw the nervous hope in her eyes. "The mail's on the counter," she said softly. Vincent set Willa in her high chair with some blocks to play with, then approached the stack of letters with growing anticipation. The envelope from the fertility clinic was there, official and intimidating. "Do you want to open it or should I?" he asked. "Together," Sloane said, moving to his side. "Whatever it says, we face it together." Vincent tore open the envelope with slightly shaking hands, unfolding the letter that would determine their next chapter. His eyes scanned the medical terminology, searching for the key words that would deliver hope or disappointment. His face broke into a grin that could have powered the entire house. "Sloane." His voice was thick with emotion. "We're pregnant." "What?" Sloane's voice was barely a whisper. "You're pregnant. 8 weeks." Vincent dropped the letter and lifted her off her feet, spinning her around the kitchen while she laughed and cried at the same time. "We're having another baby." "Baby?" Willa clapped from her high chair, not understanding the words but recognizing the joy in her parents' voices. Vincent set Sloane down gently, his hands immediately moving to her still flat stomach. "Another little one," he murmured, wonder in his voice. "Another miracle." Sloane covered his hands with hers, tears streaming down her face. "Are you happy? Happy?" Vincent looked at her like she'd asked if the sky was blue. "Sloane, I don't have words for what I am. Grateful, amazed, completely overwhelmed by how blessed we are." They stood there in their small kitchen, hands on Sloane's belly where their second child was growing, while Willa babbled happily in her high chair and dinner simmered on the stove. It was a scene of such ordinary domestic bliss that it would have been invisible to Vincent's former self, the man who measured success in stock prices and board meetings. "Do you ever miss it?" Sloane asked softly. "The penthouse, the power, the way people used to look at you when you walked into a room." Vincent considered the question seriously, as he always did when she asked about his past life. "Sometimes I miss the simplicity of it," he admitted. "It was easier when success could be measured in numbers on a spreadsheet. But miss the actual life? Never. Not for a single moment. Even when you're helping Mrs. Patterson figure out her retirement planning instead of negotiating multi-million-dollar mergers? Especially then." Vincent moved to check on dinner, stirring the sauce with practiced ease. "Mrs. Patterson is trusting me with her future, with her security. That matters more than any merger ever did." The front door opened and they heard familiar voices in the hallway. Cameron and his wife Lily, along with their 3-year-old son Jake, were joining them for their weekly family dinner. "Uncle Vincent!" Jake's voice preceded him into the kitchen as he ran straight for Vincent's legs, hugging them tightly. "Hey there, buddy." Vincent ruffled Jake's hair, then looked up as Cameron and Lily entered, carrying wine and what looked like homemade dessert. "Sorry we're late," Lily said, setting down her contribution to the meal. "Someone insisted on stopping at every interesting rock between the car and your front door." "Rocks are very important," Vincent said seriously to Jake, who nodded with the gravity only a 3-year-old could muster. "Speaking of important things," Cameron said, noticing the fertility clinic letter still on the counter, "do you two have news to share?" Vincent and Sloane exchanged glances. Then Sloane nodded with a smile that lit up the entire room. "Willa's going to be a big sister," Vincent announced. The kitchen erupted in congratulations and hugs, Jake demanding to know where the baby was hiding, Willa clapping along with the excitement, even though she didn't understand it. In the chaos of celebration, Vincent caught Sloane's eye across the room and saw his own overwhelming happiness reflected there. Later, after dinner was finished and the dishes were done, after Cameron's family had gone home and Willa was tucked into her crib, Vincent and Sloane sat on their back porch watching the stars emerge in the clear suburban sky. Sloane was curled against Vincent's side, his hand resting protectively on her stomach. "I was thinking," Sloane said softly, "about names." "Already?" Vincent's laugh rumbled through his chest. "We just found out a few hours ago. I can't help it. I'm excited." Sloane tilted her head to look at him. "If it's a boy, what about James? After your grandfather?" Vincent was quiet for a moment, thinking of the grandfather who had taught him to fish, who had shown him that success wasn't measured in dollars but in the love you gave and received. "James Vincent Devereaux," he said softly. "I like that. And if it's a girl?" "I was thinking Hope," Sloane said, "because that's what this feels like. Like everything we went through led us to this moment, to this life we never could have planned but somehow found anyway." Vincent pressed a kiss to the top of her head, breathing in the familiar scent of her hair. Hope Devereaux. Perfect. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the night sky and listening to the gentle sounds of their neighborhood. Distant laughter from a backyard barbecue, the soft hum of air conditioners, a dog barking somewhere down the street. It was the symphony of ordinary life, and Vincent had learned to hear the music in it. "Vincent?" Sloane's voice was sleepy now, content. "Do you think we would have found our way back to each other eventually, even without Willa?" Vincent considered the question carefully. "I don't know," he said honestly. "I was so lost, so convinced that success meant sacrificing everything else. It might have taken me years to realize that I was building an empire on sand. And now? Now I know that the only thing worth building is love. Everything else is just extra." Sloane smiled against his chest. "I love you, Vincent Devereaux. Not the man you were, not the man you might have been, but exactly the man you chose to become. I love you too, Sloane Devereaux. Thank you for giving me a second chance to get it right." As if summoned by their conversation, they heard a soft sound from the baby monitor, Willa stirring in her sleep, making the small noises that meant she was dreaming. Both parents smiled, recognizing the sound of their daughter's contentment. "Should we check on her?" Sloane asked. "In a minute," Vincent said, tightening his arms around his wife. "Let's just stay here a little longer. Just the 3 of us. Soon to be 4. Above them, stars wheeled across the vast sky, constant and eternal. But here on their small porch, wrapped in love and the promise of tomorrow, Vincent and Sloane had found something even more precious than permanence. They had found home. In the months and years that would follow, there would be challenges and joys, sleepless nights with a new baby and lazy Sunday mornings as a family of 4. Vincent would teach both his children to ride bikes and help with homework, and attend every school play and soccer game. Sloan would become the kind of teacher that students remembered decades later, the one who saw potential in every child and nurtured it with patience and love. They would grow old together in their small house with the big backyard, watching their children grow and change and eventually have families of their own. And through it all, Vincent would never once regret choosing love over ambition, presence over profit, family over everything else the world said should matter. Because in the end, sitting on that porch with his wife in his arms and his daughter sleeping peacefully inside, Vincent Devereaux had learned the most important lesson of all, that true wealth couldn't be measured in dollars or accumulated in accounts. True wealth was measured in moments like this one, quiet, perfect, infinitely precious moments that money could never buy. Sometimes the greatest success comes not from building an empire, but from learning when to walk away from one. When faced with the choice between having everything the world says you should want and having the one thing that actually matters, which would you choose? Your participation means a lot to the channel. Please share your thoughts in the comments. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the story, please subscribe to our channel and leave a comment below letting us know what you thought. Your feedback and support mean a lot to us. Stay tuned for more exciting stories.